Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a reclusive landowner in the hills of Georgia receives a letter from a smug HOA demanding access to his private stream, a quiet life turns into a high-stakes war. Trespassing, hidden drones, and legal ambushes ignite a battle where one man defends his land by any means necessary. I've always believed that a man's peace was measured not by silence, but by the length of his driveway and the sturdiness of his gate. And out here in the hills of northern Georgia, my gate was damn sturdy. Reinforced steel frame, stone pillars I laid myself, and a keypad I programmed to reject anything but the most precise 6-digit code. Beyond that gate lay 60 acres of God's most underrated work: sloping woodland, cold spring-fed creek, a hand-restored bridge, and the old logging trail that wound through what my late father used to call the fold in the land. I called it home. I hadn't heard from a neighbor in months. That was by design. Most folks around here either respected land or kept their heads down pretending to. But that quiet ended when I received an envelope that looked like it had been printed by a bored office assistant with too much toner and not enough caffeine. It came on a Wednesday. I remember because that's when I usually burn brush, and I nearly tossed the envelope into the pile with everything else until I saw the bold, smug emblem in the corner: High Laurel Ridge Homeowners Association. Inside was a letter printed on thick paper, the kind that tries to feel like legal weight, but smells like cheap authority. It began politely enough: "Dear Mr. Rowe," misspelled my name. "We are pleased to welcome you to the High Laurel Ridge community." That's funny, I thought. Nobody welcomed me when I bought this land 17 years ago, probably because their subdivision hadn't been built yet. The letter went on, outlining an invitation to join the HOA, followed by a neat little bulleted list of minimum compliance expectations. At the top of that list: provide all community board members with key or code access to the entrance gate at your east trailhead to allow safe member access to the community stream corridor. Right below that: maintain cleared access path from the gate to the creek bank for pedestrian traffic. I reread it twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating from wood smoke. They wanted keys to my gate, to my road, to my creek, which, mind you, doesn't run into their property. It starts here. And, last I checked, geology doesn't bend to committee decisions. I folded the letter back with all the care I'd give a gum wrapper and tossed it on my kitchen table. An hour later, I'd already drafted a formal response, curt, legal, notarized, and hand-delivered to their shiny new clubhouse gate by a courier wearing camo and a don't-give-a-damn grin. I also enclosed a copy of my deed, dated decades before their HOA even existed, and highlighted the boundary lines. My land wasn't just not part of their HOA, it was older than the damn HOA, possibly older than Karen Lessington's face, which I was about to become intimately familiar with. The next morning, I was loading gravel into the back of my truck when I saw movement near the east gate. I squinted past the rise and made out a wiry man in a golf shirt crouched by the lockbox. In his hand was a pair of bolt cutters. Real subtle. I didn't say a word, just triggered the camera system and let it do its thing. The guy fiddled for maybe 30 seconds before my old diesel engine roared to life behind him. He looked up like a squirrel caught on a hot grill. I drove down slow, deliberate, and stopped short just behind him. He didn't wait for conversation, dropped the cutters and scrambled back up the road, almost tripping over his boat shoes. The kind of man who calls himself an outdoorsman because he owns a Yeti cooler. That night, I reviewed the footage, pulled clean stills of his face, his car, even the vanity plate, LSSFUN, of all things. I uploaded the clips to a backup drive, printed out copies, and handed everything over to Deputy Alvarez from the county sheriff's office the next morning. She chuckled and said, "This gonna be one of those HOA years again, Camden?" "Looks like it," I told her. "They want my water." She laughed. "They'll wish they asked for firewood instead." But that was just the first attempt. 2 days later, another envelope came, this one on formal letterhead from a law firm 3 towns over. Inside, phrases like reasonable easement expectation, community environmental stewardship, and public utility precedent. There was also a veiled warning about being seen as non-cooperative in matters of shared resource management. No signatures, just initials. So, I did what any reasonable man would do. I hired my own damn lawyer, not because I was afraid, because I knew this wasn't going to stop at letters. And, sure enough, it didn't. The next envelope didn't arrive in the mail. It was hand-delivered by a woman who looked like she'd just stepped off the set of a suburban vampire drama. White slacks, lavender blouse, expensive pearls that probably hadn't touched sweat since the Clinton administration. She marched right up to my front gate, on foot this time, and buzzed the call box like she expected a valet to answer. I watched from the porch with a coffee in hand and a .45 holstered under my flannel, just in case civility lost the vote. When I answered through the intercom, her voice came out tight and overly pleasant, the kind you reserve for children or mentally unwell raccoons. "Hello, Mr. Rowe. I'm Karen Lessington, president of the High Laurel Ridge Homeowners Association. I'd like to discuss your non-compliance." I could almost hear the capital letters in that last word. I pressed the button. "You're not my HOA." "Well, not yet," she said sweetly. "But we consider your property to fall within our expanded ecological boundary, and we're trying to avoid legal unpleasantness." I paused. "You brought bolt cutters last week. That was unpleasant." Silence. Then she smiled right into the camera and said, "May I come in?" "No, ma'am, but you may leave." She didn't. Not for another 15 minutes. Just stood there, staring at the keypad like she could will it open. Eventually, she left a manila folder at the base of the gate and walked back up the trail toward the HOA compound, muttering into her phone the whole way. The folder contained a formal community integration package. It had bylaws, dues schedules, landscaping regulations, even color swatches for acceptable fencing. There was a line highlighted in yellow that read, "All access easements must remain available to HOA personnel and approved guests between sunrise and sundown." Nice try. I tossed it onto the growing pile of HOA paper and moved on with my week. I had a drainage trench to finish and a trail camera to install by the southern ridge. That night, while checking the camera feed, I caught a different visitor, a man in business casual, standing just beyond the stone wall near my property line, pointing what looked like a handheld scanner at my gate. That's when I realized they weren't just poking around, they were probing. So I adjusted. I called in a favor from an old buddy of mine, retired Army engineer who owed me for helping him pour his bunker slab back in Colorado. He came out in his lifted truck, looked over my gate system, and by sundown we'd replaced the electronic lock with a military-grade coded pad that re-encrypted every 48 hours. I also installed a biometric palm reader on the side panel. Karen would need my hand to get in, and I wasn't about to offer her a handshake. Then came the lawyers. A second letter, this one on letterhead from an Atlanta firm, threatened to escalate the matter with the County Environmental Board. The claim? That my unauthorized closure of a natural waterway was causing imminent ecological harm downstream. They cited erosion patterns, disrupted amphibian migration, and something about community groundwater flow expectations. The only thing I'd disrupted was HOA Fantasyland. So I went on offense. I scheduled an independent ecological survey with one of the top hydrologists from the state university, a wiry guy with field boots and a PhD who took one look at the stream and said, "Hell, this is pristine." He spent 2 days on site, tested flow rates, cross-referenced watershed maps, and confirmed what I already knew. The creek not only flowed, naturally, it originated entirely within my property line. Clean, cold, undisturbed, not a dam or blockage in sight. He even noted that I'd improved erosion conditions with my retaining stones and native vegetation, said the state should thank me. I paid him, shook his hand, and requested a formal report within the week. I didn't wait. Armed with his preliminary findings, I called the bluff. I filed a public counter-complaint with the county board against the HOA. I cited harassment, attempted unlawful entry, and filed a property protection notice under the Private Land Stewardship Act. I included stills from my cameras, a log of every uninvited visit, and a written declaration from Deputy Alvarez confirming the attempted bolt cutter incident. A week later, the county notified me that a hearing had been scheduled. HOA would need to prove their claims before any ruling on access or community impact. The best part? Karen's face when she received the same notice taped to her HOA clubhouse door by the county clerk. She looked like someone had just told her Starbucks was banning soy milk. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in the old county administration building, the one that smelled like damp folders and recalled more mildew than justice. I arrived in boots and denim, clean-shaven, with a binder under one arm and a USB stick in my breast pocket containing 2 weeks' worth of camera footage, geotagged maps, and hydrology reports. I was ready to fight, not with fists, but with facts sharpened to a fine point. The conference room was already full. HOA had brought an entourage, Karen herself, dressed like she was on her way to a wine tasting. Her attorney, a pale, twitchy man in a cheap suit who looked allergic to sunlight, and 2 smug board members, one with a Bluetooth in his ear, the other carrying a laptop and a reusable water bottle that said, "Protect our stream." Irony was clearly not invited. The county's environmental board consisted of 5 locals, each sitting behind a long wooden table with legal pads and glasses of lukewarm water. They looked like people who had seen it all and were ready to see some more. At the head sat Chairwoman Mary Tisdale, who had the face of someone who didn't take kindly to theatrics and who'd known my father back when he taught high school shop class. "Let's proceed," she said dryly. Karen's lawyer stood first. He launched into a well-rehearsed monologue about community ecosystems and the responsibility of upstream landowners to ensure access and natural flow. He presented a printed map with a red dotted line showing the creek, exaggerated to suggest it, somehow twisted its way through HOA property. His claim that denying access to the stream entrance on my land was actively harming the community's environmental equilibrium. He used phrases like constructive obstruction and water equity. I waited until he finished, then stood, placed my binder on the table, and began with 2 words. "That map's a lie." Gasps are rare in county hearings, but I got a few. I handed each board member a packet with the real topography, county registered, surveyed within the last 6 months, and backed by the university's hydrology lab. I explained, clearly and without raising my voice, that the stream in question originated from 3 separate underground springs entirely within my boundary. I showed before and after photographs of erosion control work I'd personally done and cited the exact state statute giving private landowners the right to secure and maintain natural features on their land so long as no obstruction is created. Then I played the video. A clip from my trail cam, a man with bolt cutters kneeling at my gate, then running when my truck pulled up behind him. I identified the man as an HOA board member. I also presented the photos of the wireless scanner, the unauthorized flow sensor found bolted to a tree, and finally, the invoice for that sensor, paid from High Laurel Ridge's own maintenance fund, signed by K. Lessington. Karen's face twitched like someone had thrown cold water on a circuit board. When I was done, Chairwoman Tisdale looked at Karen and said flatly, "Do you deny authorizing this equipment?" Karen sat stiffly. It was an ecological initiative, not a trespass. "That initiative occurred entirely on private land without permission," I added. "That's a crime in this county." Their lawyer tried to recover. "Even so, the question remains of shared resource usage." "No," Tisdale interrupted. "The question now is whether the HOA is attempting to force control over land it has no jurisdiction over, and whether criminal charges should be referred." You could feel the air go out of the HOA side of the room. The smug board members stopped scrolling on their phones. Karen started flipping through her folder like she could reverse time by shuffling paperwork fast enough. The final ruling came after a short recess. The board voted 5-0. The HOA had no legal right to access or claim easement on my land. The stream was not a community resource, and the environmental complaints were dismissed as factually baseless. The matter was closed, and any further attempts to interfere with private land without authorization would be forwarded directly to law enforcement. Karen stood there like a statue while her lawyer whispered damage control. I thanked the board, shook Chairwoman Tisdale's hand, and walked out into the daylight, boots thudding on the courthouse steps like punctuation marks. But I knew Karen wasn't finished, not by a long shot. One thing about mountain land, if someone walks where they shouldn't, it tells on them. Grass bends, stones shift, branches don't forget. That's how I knew someone had been on my property again just 3 days after the hearing. I spotted a fresh scuff in the gravel path behind the old tractor shed. It was small, boot-shaped, and had that unmistakable, "I was trying to be sneaky but stepped wrong" tilt. I didn't say anything. I just checked the time, snapped a photo, and started reviewing the motion logs from my trail cameras. At 2:41 a.m., one of my southern perimeter cams picked up movement. Two figures, flashlights, one carrying a tool bag. They moved along the fence line, paused near the north tree line, and then disappeared out of frame. I checked the drone footage from that same morning. Sure enough, a small rectangular object was now mounted near the east side of the gatepost. It hadn't been there before. I hiked out to the spot that afternoon. There, bolted to the back side of my stone gate column, almost invisibly tucked between ivy and mortar, was a small, matte black Bluetooth beacon the size of a thumb drive. Industrial grade, battery powered, designed to sniff and spoof local signal frequencies. I removed it with a screwdriver, carefully bagged it, and called Deputy Alvarez. She showed up with a technician from the county IT division and a crime scene kit. The beacon had a signature ID burned into the firmware, which matched one of the e-lock access testers sold exclusively to HOA management groups through a supplier in Charlotte. A supplier who, by the way, just happened to appear in the same invoice registry as the HOA's previous flow sensor. While they worked, I took a walk along the creek, more out of instinct than anything else, and that's when I spotted the second device. Half buried near the bridge, nestled under a mossy rock, was a flow meter with a wireless transmitter, likely left behind from the last ecological initiative Karen had pretended not to authorize. Except this time it was wired into a solar-powered relay box, hidden under what looked like a birdhouse. They hadn't just trespassed again. They were actively collecting real-time data from my land, sending it somewhere. Alvarez's jaw clenched when she saw it. "This goes beyond a nuisance complaint," she said. "This is covert surveillance. We bagged it, labeled everything, and I sent a copy of the findings to my lawyer the same night." He nearly spit out his drink. "Camden," he said, "this is a federal privacy issue now. You want me to go scorched earth?" "Not yet," I told him. "Let them dig a little deeper. It'll look better in court when the whole damn tunnel collapses." The next day, I flew the drone along the ridge trail that separates my land from the HOA's northern greenbelt. About 100 feet beyond my fence line, I spotted deep ruts, the kind left by golf carts trying to navigate rough, wet terrain. One set peeled off the trail and curved up toward my eastern boundary. I hiked out and confirmed it in person. Tire marks, snapped underbrush, and even a dropped pen with High Laurel Ridge HOA printed on the barrel. They were getting careless. Or cocky. By nightfall, I'd reinforced my fences with motion lights and added 2 more high-res night vision cameras, one overlooking the bridge, the other aimed at the exact spot they'd slipped through. The place was starting to look less like a homestead and more like a low-budget NSA field office, but I didn't care. This land had been in my family for nearly a century, and if Karen thought she could turn it into a community stream trail with the help of spy gear and golf carts, she was about to learn just how deep those roots ran. Still, I knew a storm was coming. They wouldn't crawl through brush and wire themselves into my property just to give up. No, this wasn't the end. This was them laying the groundwork, and I was already digging the countermeasures. The envelope was thick, heavy, and hand-delivered by a man who looked like he didn't want to be there. He didn't say a word, just handed me the paperwork, nodded once, and turned back to his SUV, tires crunching over gravel like it was eggshells. Inside were 3 documents stapled together and tagged with colored tabs like some kind of legal buffet. At the top, petition for judicial review and relief, High Laurel Ridge Homeowners Association versus Camden Row. I read the headers out loud just to feel the absurdity vibrate in my throat. Count 1, petition to mandate access easement to critical ecological resource, the stream. Count 2, motion to compel inclusion of Camden Row's property into High Laurel Ridge HOA jurisdiction based on natural adjacency and watershed overlap. Count 3, demand for emergency access to Camden Row's private gate and bridge for the purposes of evacuation safety and disaster mitigation. They were trying to force me into the HOA, take my land's water, and seize control of my entrance. All in one blow. Karen wasn't poking anymore. She'd launched a full siege. I drove straight to my lawyer's office in town, parked sideways in his lot, and dropped the packet on his desk like a dead animal. He whistled when he saw the triple filing. "Well, damn, she really threw the HOA handbook at you, didn't she? She wants the stream, the gate, and the deed, in that order." He opened a drawer and pulled out a legal pad. "Then let's give her what she didn't ask for, counteraction." We got to work. First, I provided everything I had: surveillance footage, timestamps, GPS coordinates, equipment serial numbers, invoices, and expert reports. He compiled it into a neat dossier thicker than a church hymnal and began crafting our response. Then we hit them back. First, we filed a motion to dismiss based on lack of standing. My land had never been, and could never be, subject to HOA authority without voluntary annexation. Second, we filed a criminal complaint for unlawful surveillance and data collection on private land. Third, we demanded a forensic audit of HOA funds used for equipment purchased without consent of the full board. My lawyer suspected Karen had been signing off purchases on her own, bypassing internal oversight. While the court scheduled the hearing, I started securing the homestead even tighter. I replaced the front gate's lock system with a biometric scanner and multi-frequency jammer. The whole thing looked like it belonged in a James Bond villain lair. One morning, a man in a gray suit showed up outside my property line. Said he was with the HOA's emergency committee, claimed they needed to pre-stage an evacuation route through my gate in case of wildfire. I pointed to the sign nailed to my fence: private land, not a designated route. Trespassers will be documented. Sir, he said carefully, you're creating a liability issue for the community. No, I said, you're creating a lawsuit for yourself. He backed off, got in his Prius, and drove away. That afternoon, I went over my camera logs again. The night before, someone had walked along the Northern Ridge Trail. No obvious break-in attempt, but they paused at the fence line for nearly 20 minutes, just standing there, watching, like they were waiting for something or someone. I didn't like that, so I installed another drone nest, this one equipped with a high-range directional mic. From now on, I'd not only see them, I'd hear them. Back in town, my lawyer was having a field day. He'd already located a breach in the HOA's filings. They had no legal pathway to annex outside properties without a unanimous board vote and landowner consent, both of which they'd conveniently skipped. We filed for a full discovery process. The court approved it, and within 72 hours, we had access to HOA internal emails, board minutes, and, most damning of all, a communications thread between Karen and the HOA attorney where she openly admitted she considered Camden's land an eventual community access route whether he agreed or not. Her words, her name, her timestamp. The real kicker? One of the emails included a PDF mock-up of a proposed trailhead sign labeled High Laurel Ridge Nature Access, with my coordinates printed right on it. They had already started branding my land before the first legal hearing even began. They didn't want cooperation. They wanted conquest. But they just handed me the evidence I needed to burn them to the ground. By the time the court date was set, I'd become less of a landowner and more of a Cold War-era bunker operator. My property was wired tighter than Fort Knox. Cameras, drones, sensors, and a backup server buried in a storm shelter just in case someone got smart with a magnet. But no amount of cameras could prepare me for what I found one Thursday morning when I checked my mailbox. Inside was a flyer, glossy, double-sided. At the top, coming soon, High Laurel Ridge Waterside Trail Experience. And underneath, a map that made my stomach lurch. The trail started from their golf cart lot, meandered through the woods, crossed the stream on my bridge, and ended with a marker labeled Scenic Overlook Camden Falls. They had named a waterfall after me, on my land, without my permission. I stood there, half laughing, half foaming at the mouth until I heard the faint buzz of a drone overhead. Not mine. I turned slowly and spotted it hovering just above the tree line, matte black, compact, with a fisheye lens aimed right at me. HOA had deployed surveillance drones now. They'd escalated to aerial trespass. I went into the house, flipped on the jamming grid, and watched the thing twitch and spiral out of control before crash landing near the edge of the creek. I retrieved it with tongs and bagged it like a radioactive rat. Serial number unregistered, but the micro SD inside held several hours of footage of me, my tools, my guests, even my dog's water bowl. I handed it over to Deputy Alvarez. She took one look and said, "You want me to get a warrant?" "No," I said. "Not yet. Let's see what else they send flying first." Over the next 4 days, I was buzzed 3 more times, always at dawn or dusk, never the same drone. One of them even tried hovering behind my barn like it was scouting structural weaknesses. I shot that one out of the air with a slingshot loaded with a ball bearing. Felt good, like the old days. Meanwhile, my lawyer was digging through the HOA's internal records like a bloodhound on caffeine. We had already found a half-dozen violations of state property laws and HOA charter protocols, but what he found next made me pause. A subcontract invoice for community beautification prep, dated 2 weeks prior, included materials for clearing brush, gravel stabilization, and trail signage stakes, all billed for a location with my coordinates. They weren't planning to win the case. They were planning to move ahead anyway and figure they'd pay whatever fine came later. Build first, argue later. It was HOA imperialism at its finest. I doubled down. I hired a local excavation guy, Mac, to trench out a new line of steel posts around the stream perimeter and install a motion-triggered perimeter alarm connected to a siren and floodlights. I wanted the next trespasser to feel like they'd wandered into a CIA black site. That weekend, it rained hard. Good Appalachian rain, the kind that turns streams into frothing silver snakes. Around midnight, the alarm went off, sharp, wailing, insistent. I pulled on boots, grabbed my flashlight and rifle, and stormed down toward the lower ridge. What I found stopped me cold. A man, soaked head to toe, was straddling the stream with a tape measure, water up to his knees, trying to take cross-sectional readings. Another man was up on the slope with a handheld GPS unit, logging coordinates. Neither wore uniforms. Both froze when the floodlights lit up the woods like a crime scene. "Step out of the water and lie down. Hands visible," I barked. One of them dropped the tape. The other tried to run. Didn't get far. Mac had parked his backhoe across the trail as a blockade. The guy bounced off it like a cartoon raccoon and went down hard. We called the sheriff. Both men were detained. One claimed he was hired by a contractor for a greenway assessment. The other wouldn't speak without a lawyer, but their rental car. The registration traced back to a landscaping company with an active service contract from High Laurel Ridge HOA. Caught, red-handed, wet boots and all. By morning, I had surveillance footage, confessions, chain of custody logs, and wet footprints across 4 acres of private terrain. My lawyer looked over the report and smiled like a man holding a winning lottery ticket. "We've got them," he said. "All the evidence. Illegal surveillance, unauthorized land use, and a demonstrable attempt to build infrastructure without permission. And still, I had the feeling they weren't done, because people like Karen didn't know how to quit. They only knew how to escalate until they drowned in their own paperwork. By the time the hearing date rolled around, I wasn't nervous. I was mad. Mad in that clean, calm way you only get when the people trying to destroy your life hand you the gun, the bullets, and a notarized confession that they loaded it. My lawyer, Clay, wore his best dad at the funeral of his enemy's suit. He didn't even bring a briefcase, just a flash drive and a stack of affidavits so thick they needed their own seat. The courthouse was already humming when we got there. Karen had brought a small army, 3 HOA board members, 2 lawyers in matching Navy suits, and a man who looked like he'd eaten a cease and desist letter for breakfast. She gave me that saccharine smile she always used when trying to seem reasonable, but I noticed her eyes darting, scanning the gallery like she was looking for a lifeboat. We took our places. The judge, an older woman with the posture of a fencing instructor and the patience of a clock, wasted no time. "Let's begin." Karen's team opened with dramatic flair. Her lead attorney argued that access to the stream was essential to the community's health, recreation, and environmental stewardship. He spoke of ecological integrity, watershed harmonization, and my unjustified barricading of a shared resource. I almost choked when they submitted an exhibit showing my stone gate labeled Community Obstruction Point A. They even tried to argue that my biometric lock created a public safety risk because emergency vehicles might one day need to cross my bridge during a hypothetical forest fire. Then Clay stood up and unzipped his little folder of hell. First, he played the drone footage, one of theirs, showing HOA surveillance over my land, zooming in on my front porch, my tool shed, and even a moment where I'm adjusting the waistband of my boxers on the deck. The gallery gasped. Next came the GPS logs of the hired contractors caught in my stream, followed by police reports, rental car contracts, and the service invoice signed personally by Karen. Then the pièce de résistance, the email thread where she told her board, "Even if he doesn't cooperate, we'll establish the trail and deal with the legal stuff later." Clay read that one slowly, letting it marinate in the silence. The judge was still silent, but her brow arched so hard I thought it might break orbit. Karen tried to interrupt, claimed the email was taken out of context. The judge shut her down instantly. Then came our countersuit presentation. Clay laid out: violation of state and federal privacy laws, trespassing with surveillance equipment, unlawful data collection, attempted forced annexation, intent to build infrastructure on private property without permit, defamation via printed materials and mailers. We submitted the HOA's trail map with my land mislabeled. We submitted receipts for the Bluetooth beacon, water sensor, and their installation timestamps. We included expert witness testimony from an IT forensics analyst confirming the signal spoofing attempt on my gate. Karen's team looked like they were melting. Then the judge finally spoke. This is not merely a dispute over property boundaries or membership. What I see here is a sustained, coordinated campaign to undermine and forcibly absorb a private citizen's land with blatant disregard for legal boundaries, consent, or basic decency. She turned to Karen directly. You will not speak unless asked, and you are in very real danger of criminal charges. And just like that, the room changed. You could feel it, like when the wind shifts before a lightning strike. The judge ordered a full injunction against HOA activity concerning my land, a freeze on their trail project, and immediate forensic audit of all HOA expenses for the past 2 fiscal years. Karen tried to stand up and object. The judge told her to sit down or be held in contempt. I didn't smile, but Clay did. Like he just watched a magician get caught palming the ace and get slapped in front of a sold-out crowd. Outside the courthouse, local news crews were already gathering. Apparently, someone had tipped them off that this was more than a zoning dispute. Karen ducked her head and tried to rush past. One of the reporters shouted, "Do you really believe Camden Rose Waterfall belongs to the community?" She didn't answer, but I did. "No one owns a waterfall," I said, "but they sure as hell can own the rocks around it." A week after the hearing, I was chopping firewood when my phone buzzed with a message from Clay. Check your email and get a drink. The subject line of the attachment said it all. State versus. Karen Lessington, formal charges filed. 14 counts, 14. Criminal trespass, electronic surveillance, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit property interference, filing false environmental claims, unauthorized use of HOA funds, obstruction of justice. The list read like the resume of a Bond villain with a penchant for HOA newsletters. Karen was officially being indicted, not just sued, indicted, and I hadn't even started pressing civil charges yet. I poured myself 2 fingers of whiskey and sat on the porch, watching the fog roll over the ridge like a slow-moving wave of cosmic justice. That afternoon, code enforcement officials showed up at High Laurel Ridge. Not just 1 or 2, 4 county trucks and a state investigator. They sealed the so-called trailhead with crime scene tape, pulled permits from the clubhouse, and started collecting invoices. One of the workers told Mac, who told me, that they'd already found $92,000 in unaccounted ecological improvement spending, which just happened to line up with the drone surveillance, the fake beautification invoices, and the illegal trail prep. Karen's face hit the local news that night, mugshot and all. I didn't even smile. I just grilled a steak and fed the scraps to my dog, Ringo, who had started barking every time he heard the word HOA. But it wasn't over yet. At the next board meeting, held under the confused blinking lights of a half-powered clubhouse, half the HOA board resigned on the spot. The treasurer broke down in tears and admitted she'd signed expense forms without reading them, trusting Karen because she said it was for the good of the community. They were unraveling fast. Then came the class action suit. Not mine, theirs. A group of homeowners within High Laurel Ridge filed their own claim against Karen and the HOA board for misuse of dues, unauthorized legal action, and reputational damage. They used my court filings as primary evidence. Clay called it poetic. I called it overdue. The judge's final ruling in my civil countersuit came 2 weeks later. The HOA was found guilty of attempted forced annexation of private land, trespass and covert surveillance, environmental misrepresentation, fraudulent marketing using private property, malicious prosecution. The damages: $980,000 paid out of their HOA reserve fund. That meant homeowners, golf cart warriors, and second home retirees were now footing the bill for Karen's crusade. No one was happy. The judge also imposed a permanent injunction. High Laurel Ridge was forbidden from referencing my stream, my bridge, or my property in any public materials, advertisements, trail maps, or community initiatives. And Karen, she took a plea deal. 14 months in county jail, reduced from a longer sentence in exchange for a full confession and permanent ban from any HOA leadership position anywhere in the state of Georgia. She was led out of the courthouse in handcuffs, ranting about restoring ecological equity and the divine rights of shared water. I watched her from the steps. She turned to me, eyes wide with that twitchy desperation people get when their grip on control finally shatters. This stream should have belonged to everyone. I leaned in slightly, calm as ever. "Good luck getting to it," I said. "Through concrete, steel, and a felony conviction." She screamed something at me, but the engine of the prison van swallowed it whole. Later that week, I installed the last layer of upgrades: biometric locks on the gate, steel reinforcement on the bridge, and new signs that read, "Private property, no access, no exceptions." I even had a custom one made, bolted to a boulder right beside the water. "Camden Falls, access denied." Local legend, they started calling it. I didn't mind.